89th Texas Legislature just wrapped up a few weeks ago, and wow, they were busy. This session saw some of the highest volume bills filed in recent Texas legislative history, and a lot of that action was around energy policy. Now, energy is kind of a big deal here in Texas, so I wanted to bring in someone who's been watching all of this closely. That's why I've got Carson Clayton here with me. He's the campaign director for Life Powered at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and he's going to walk us through some energy bills from this session that he thinks will have the biggest impact on Texans. Carson, thanks for joining me.
Happy to be here.
Well, we'll get right into it. HB 3228. This is one you were watching a lot during the session, and it seeks to strengthen landowner protections and ensure proper end-of-life management for wind and solar energy facilities by addressing gaps in the current disposal and recycling requirements. Okay, so this bill, it mentions gaps in the current disposal and recycling for wind and solar, but I think most people assume that these green wind and solar energy facilities, they last a long time and are recycling everything they can. Is that not the case?
They last a little bit, usually about 20 years on average, but there's very little recycling going on. And I wrote a lot about this a while back, an op-ed. It's called Green Garbage, if anyone wants to read that. But, so yeah, typically about 20 years, but the kind of infrastructure to recycle this stuff at scale isn't quite there. And there's lots of stuff to recycle, to get rid of whenever these facilities are done producing energy. So if you think of a wind turbine, there's the actual turbine blades, and then the steel support. For solar panels, it's mostly steel and glass. So there's lots of kind of trash that exists after they're done, but there's not a lot of recycling taking place right now.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. Oh, so could you walk us through what happens under the current law when a project operator fails to properly clean up their site?
So right now, Texas law, before the passage of this bill, did require these facilities, when they're done operating, for those operators to clear out the wind turbines, the solar panels, and kind of reclaim the land. What this bill does is actually require them to actually do something, have a guarantee they're going to do something with those materials whenever they're done with it. So again, right now there's not a whole lot happening. A lot of solar panels in particular, they're classified as a hazardous material because there's the rare earth metals and stuff that are inside of it. I think right now it costs about $20 to $30 to recycle a solar panel. It costs about $1 to just dump it in a landfill or something. So that's what's happening. With wind turbines and wind turbine blades, the steel support columns, that's steel. We know how to recycle steel. We can do that. The blades are wood and fiberglass. And what do you do with those? You can burn them. You can bury them. That's often what happens. There's lots of concepts out there for ways to recycle these. I think if you go on YouTube, you can look up, there's 10 different TED Talks talking about how to recycle wind turbine blades, and there are always some iteration of cut them into sections and call them something else. Put them on legs and call them a bus stop, or a rain, like a rain guard for bikes and things like that. I think a lot of the evidence of this bill was from what we've seen happening here in Texas, specifically in Sweetwater, Texas. So in Sweetwater, there's lots of wind turbines in Sweetwater, Texas. If you've ever been there, I drive through it every time I go home to Lubbock. The Welcome to Sweetwater sign is a wind turbine. So lots of wind turbines there. There's a company there. There's a company called Global Fiberglass Solutions, and they're getting paid to take wind turbines from GE and other wind turbine companies to recycle these things. And they said they have a facility and this novel way of they're going to grind this up and turn it into pavement, or who knows? But they never did that. So they stacked these wind turbines up, sometimes 20 or 30 feet high, in these towns like Sweetwater. And it's just become kind of a den for vermin and snakes, and kids are playing on it and hurting themselves, and it's obviously a terrible eyesore. So I think that's what kind of prompted these bills. Now, what they're going to have to do going forward is whenever they set up the agreement to build these facilities, they're going to first have to provide the landowner and everybody involved a estimate on what the reclamation and recycling costs are going to be. They're going to have to put forward some sort of financial assurance, whether a bond or, like a letter of guarantee that they're going to be able to afford this. And they're going to have to kind of update that throughout the 20-year lifespan, so that they are, there's a guarantee in place that they're going to do something and actually recycle these. Now, one thing with this bill is that it does only apply to new generations. So it's for wind and solar that is built after the passage. So, but as most people know, Texas is definitely leading in wind, and will soon be leading in solar. And this bill's not going to apply to any of those. And we're going to have a massive garbage problem on our hands. If you look at just what exists right now, wind turbines, again, just the steel support structures to hold those turbines up. We got, I think, about 40 gigawatts of wind right now. It's close to 20,000 individual turbines. There's going to be about 4 million tons of the steel that needs to be recycled. There's going to be about 800,000 tons of wind turbines that are going to have to be recycled. And then with solar, I think we have about 30, maybe soon to be 40 gigs of solar. That's tens of millions of individual panels. Again, much cheaper just to dump them. But this law is going to require that, again, new solar is going to be actually recycled. But all that stuff that isn't covered by this law, it's going to be interesting to see what they do with that. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like at least this puts a little more accountability on new producers of wind and solar, although all that other stuff's probably going to end up in a landfill, as you say. So how do you see this affecting the wind and solar industry's operations in Texas moving forward? As you said, it's only new producers. So what do you think that's going to do for them?
Well, I mean, the best thing is that they're going to be held to a similar standard as other energy sources, hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal operations. There's, entire chapters of state code determining what they're going to do with their waste material, how they recycle it, how they dispose of it, things like that. So them being held to a standard moving forward, that's good. Similar standard. Again, the infrastructure to recycle and dispose of this stuff responsibly and at scale isn't really in place. Again, if you go look for ways to do it, there's lots of startup companies. There's lots of people saying how they plan to do it, but I don't know if anybody really realizes how much of this is coming our way. So since they're got to provide some financial assurance, they'll probably have to work that into their planning when they're planning these facilities. Maybe they build a little bit less. And somebody, I think, is in a good spot to come up with a way to reuse these materials and make sure they're not sitting around forever.
Yeah. All right. Well, moving on to the next bill here, HB 14. It establishes the Texas Advanced Nuclear Energy Office, which aims to promote the advanced nuclear energy industry in Texas. And it also creates the Texas Advanced Nuclear Development Fund. Okay. So as a fan of nuclear energy myself, I'm excited about that. But as a guy who's also skeptical of government, the language seems pretty vague. So in practice, how do you think this new nuclear energy office is going to promote nuclear energy in Texas?
So this is... I would say first that this is just the beginning. Everybody's very excited about nuclear energy. It's kind of old technology at this point, but there's definitely some new excitement around it. This is, I think, again, the beginning of probably a multi-session effort to encourage nuclear facilities and nuclear supply chain companies to come to Texas. But it's also kind of the most recent step in what's been a multi-year effort to make sure Texas, as the energy capital of the world, also sets itself up to be the nuclear capital of the world. So back in 2023, Governor Abbott announced that he was going to prioritize nuclear energy. He called for the Public Utility Commission to put together a working group to study how we can streamline the deployment of nuclear technology in Texas. And they worked for about a year and came out with a lot of suggestions. And what you see in this bill is definitely one of them. So this office, within the office of the governor, they're going to be working with higher education. They're going to be doing public outreach campaigns, things like that, to make sure everyone knows that we want the nuclear companies here. Because there are some people, I think wrongfully, but are still very fearful of nuclear technology. To do that, there's also going to be a permitting officer. So the permitting process for a nuclear facility is very expensive and it lasts a really long time. You don't know what it looks like until you actually do it. So there is going to be one kind of point of contact here within Texas to kind of hold people's hands through that process and make sure they do it as much as possible. So the major hurdles to deploying, especially a nuclear reactor, are obviously the federal regulatory framework and then the capital, like getting the money to do it. So when a state wants to prioritize encouraging nuclear, they have very little, if any, control over the federal regulations. And this is the money thing, so you can throw money at it, and that's kind of what happened. But this office will, any kind of state regulatory hurdles that exist, the goal of this office is to get rid of those, to streamline the process as much as possible. And again, there's going to be, it's not just nuclear reactors, it's the supply chain companies. It's working with higher education, maybe some continuing education courses or some technical education courses for high school and college students, because we're going to need, welders and scientists and all this stuff.
Okay, so that makes sense. So it's setting it up for the future, kind of streamlining the process, going to hold some people's hands, as you say, down the process. Okay, well, that's good. But then the other big part of the bill is the Advanced Nuclear Development Fund. So how much money is going to be in that fund? You said we're throwing money at stuff. How much money is going to be in that fund, and what's it going to be used for?
So again, what does an actual state have control over? Money is one thing they can do. And what the fund is, it's a subsidy to subsidize this industry. I think initially they're looking for a few $1 billion, $2 billion. It got whittled down to $350 million. That's what's in the fund right now. And there could be, the legislature can add money to that fund if they want to. There could be grants and matching and all that stuff. But what these funds are going to be used for is they're actually going to be reimbursement grants to these companies for work that they've already done. Pretty much. So there's lots of, again, time and effort for designing and working out the specifications for reactors. So a company can get about $12 million reimbursed for that work. And then the really expensive part is actually building the facility, building the reactors. They can get $120 million reimbursed for that work. So again, these are grants. So they're not loans. And eventually, there is a stipulation in there that if they aren't meeting certain guidelines, if they're not meeting certain benchmarks, if they don't complete the project, they will eventually have to pay those funds back. But that's an issue. We definitely here at the foundation want all energy to operate on an even playing ground. We have a lot of issues with the massive subsidies that have gone towards wind and solar and had a major effect on our grid recently. This is a subsidy. A couple $100 million is a lot of money. When it comes to nuclear, it's really not a lot of money. So I think it will do some good. And we really want to prioritize encouraging nuclear technology to come to Texas without maybe incentivizing it. And I know that the goal of the bill author, Chairman Harris, Cody Harris, who wrote this bill, is to eventually get away from these sorts of subsidies. And we interviewed him here. Everyone can go and look at that video where I interviewed him on this bill, and he said the same thing. He can just justify a kind of initial kickstart to get this going. And it is, I think, the biggest investment any state's made on nuclear, but that's what the fund does.
Okay, so great. So education and expanding the energy. Okay, but so let's say this new nuclear energy office is a success. All right. Will we be seeing more operational nuclear reactors in Texas in like the next 5 years, or is this more of a long-term goal?
Definitely a long-term goal. Nobody wants to be the first or second or third reactor that's built and improved and operational. Everyone wants to learn from whatever mistakes they made, and they want to be the seventh or the eighth one. Now, it depends on what you think operational means. So I think, first of all, we have seen nuclear industries come here to Texas. We have Texas A&M is doing they're going to want to build a couple of these on their campus. Dow Chemical is down in Seadrift working on one. The big one, I think the first one we'll see is a research reactor in Abilene Christian University that Natura Resources is building. That's the first one we'll see. And we might see that complete in the next 5 years. 5 years would be really quick, but I think we might see that. It's probably going to be the first one. Again, these are research reactors. And I think some of the first deployments we're going to see are going to be either research reactors at universities, demonstration reactors, or kind of behind-the-meter reactors, which means, let's say, like an AI data center or a big industrial user of power like Dow Chemical is going to build their own small nuclear reactor to power their operations. What I haven't mentioned is nuclear power on the grid. Fueling Texas as a whole, getting that power to your home and mine. That's the goal. This first step is to eventually get there, but I don't think right now we're any closer with this bill or not to really getting power on the grid, and that's because we're going to need some market reform before we get more nuclear power on the grid. Nuclear power faces kind of the same hurdles providing power to the Texas grid that combined cycle natural gas and coal are right now. So I like this bill. I said during session a whole lot. I think this is the second most important bill when it came to putting nuclear power on the grid. I think the first most important bill was a bill that didn't pass, but we worked on very hard. That was Senate Bill 715 on reliability requirements. That I think would have done a little bit to get people to actually build nuclear reactors to provide power to the grid. Until we get some sort of market reform where where they can actually operate on the grid. It's all going to be behind the meter, right? Like self-generation or research and demonstration reaction. That's my opinion. That's what I'm looking like.
Okay, well that makes sense to me. But as a guy who's paying attention to nuclear and wants to see it expand, you mentioned nobody wants it near them and nobody wants to be the first reactor. That's funny because looking at polls and stuff, everyone in Texas is excited about nuclear. But then you ask them, would you want that new nuclear reactor in your backyard? All of a sudden, they're not as excited about nuclear. Yeah. So you mentioned SB 715. That was one you were watching a lot, as you say, authored by Senator Sparks. It didn't pass, but we were following it a lot here. And this bill seeks to expand and accelerate the implementation of reliability requirements for electric generation facilities in Texas's ERCOT power region. So first of all, for those people out there that don't know what ERCOT is, would you mind explaining what that is to them? And then second, a reliability requirement sounds like something that should already be in place. Like it sounds like something important for electricity generators. So in this context, what is a reliability requirement and why don't we have them already?
Yeah, so first, ERCOT's the Electricity Reliability Council of Texas. They're the balancing authority for they're kind of like the air traffic controllers for deploying electricity to where it needs to go from the generators to the users. So yeah, reliability requirements obviously is our number one priority this session. It's been our number one priority for a couple of sessions. We've been working on it for a few years. And all that would mean is a reliability requirement would just say that all generators, regardless of resource, would need to be able to guarantee a certain amount of electric capacity to the grid, especially at the times when Texans need it the most. Our market we have an energy only market. We generators get paid for what they actually produce and put on the market, and so supply and demand is a major that's the major factor that's determining what's going on the grid and what's not, and they value the cheapest power possible. The cheapest power possible is at wholesale prices is wind and solar. Again, we're leading on wind and solar. They're getting billions of dollars of federal subsidies to the extent that they can give their power, even pay ERCOT to take their power. So we're prioritizing that on the grid, and the result of that is that a lot of the base load thermal generation, natural gas and coal, they're sitting on the sidelines and they have to wait until demand gets really high or the prices get really high so they can actually afford to operate. So a reliability requirement would, it would start to value that capacity, the ability to provide power on demand. So again, this was our priority during the 88th legislature as well. And a bill did pass. We had a bill exactly like this. There's a bill, and Senator Schwartner carried that. And by the time it was all said and done, it got whittled down, similar to the recycling bill. It's only new generators that are going to be held to this. So any generator built after 2027 will have to meet this reliability requirement. But everybody that currently exists, they get to just keep playing as they have been. So we came back to another whack at it this session to try to expand that to all generation. And I'm happy to say it did get farther than, the concept of firming for all, as we'd call it, for the entire fleet, did get farther than it has in the past. It did pass both committees in both the Senate and the House. It got all the Senate completely, but didn't end up making it through the House. So very happy it got as far as it did, but would have liked for it to fully pass. Good news is right now the Public Utility Commission is starting, as soon as session ended, they're starting the rulemaking process for the reliability standard for new generators starting in 2027. So we'll know, I think, by the end of the year what that's going to look like, and hopefully, beneficial effects for Texans for, again, all future generation.
Okay. Well, after I saw this reliability requirement and that no one was really required to have it, I looked into it a little, and it seems like 90% of generators are exempt from this reliability standard. And is that correct, first of all? And then if it is, how does having 90% of generators exempt from this affect ERCOT's ability to properly manage the grid?
So at some point, 90% will be exempt. Right now, 100% are exempt, right? Like there's no reliability standard. How that's going to change, ERCOT's operations, not much different at all from what's going on right now, right? We're going to continue valuing the cheapest electricity first. And that's going to continue. It's kind of it's weird to think about, right? And This bill, whenever when it was going through, there's all sorts of articles coming out about it, and Texas hates wind and solar. That this bill is going to require solar panels to produce power at night, just like really ridiculous stuff. This isn't saying that wind and solar just have absolutely no place on the grid. There is a point of a certain amount of penetration of this intermittent power, the so-called renewable power, where it can result in lower prices for Texans. But there's a over penetration where it will result in higher prices for Texans, and we passed that a long time ago. We have more wind and solar than anybody else, and for what? Right? Our prices have gone up a little over 25%, I think, over the past 8 years. 2023, we paid over $2 billion in extra costs because of the volatility that wind and solar cause, because of the backup power that we need for wind and solar. So that's going to be the status quo until we have a really meaningful market reform. We're working, we're going to be watching the PUC very closely and working with them as much as we can to make sure that this future standard has some benefit to Texan ratepayers. And I think there's a possibility that some of the existing wind and solar especially can eventually fall into this standard, because the law is written in reference to the interconnection agreement that a generator would sign when they come onto the grid. So a lot of these wind and solar facilities, whenever their initial agreement runs out, maybe they're going to repower or something like that, and they're going to try to get back on the grid. Hopefully they'll fall under that standard at that point. So we'll see. Well, hopefully, I think the PUC, they want reliability, they want affordability, but they got a lot of people besides us talking to them about what they think this should look like. So hopefully they agree with us.
Okay, so let's say that in the future we pass a bill that does close these reliability gaps, and it makes every producer pay their fair share for the reliability costs, as you mentioned earlier. So what would that mean for everyday Texans? Are they going to see a decrease in their energy bills if that happens, or are they just going to see a more reliable grid that won't shut down during Winter Storm Uri type events?
Yeah. Well, I think the ultimate goal is a more reliable and more affordable grid, and that's the point. Like you mentioned, there is reliability costs already. But the only people paying them are ratepayers on our electric bill. We're paying for those costs. So if a reliability standard applied to most of, if not all of the fleet, those reliability costs would be transferred to the generators causing the unreliability, and hopefully bring a balance to this kind of overinvestment that we've had in wind and solar. So that's the goal. Yeah, it should be less volatility would mean more affordability, and that's what we're seeing in the grid right now. Lots of volatility, which is expected when you have so much generation that is dependent on the wind and sun. Right? So, absolutely.
All right. Well, thanks, Carson, for coming in today. We appreciate it. And we'll see you next session. Hopefully we get a little bit more energy bills passed and see Texas become the energy capital of the world.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.